Hey guys, welcome to the stream. So it's been a couple days since we were last here. Normally we might have a 1 day break if people are falling behind, but it seems like a number of people are just struggling because they don't have the time to work on it. Either way, that wasn't the main reason for the delay over the last 3 days. It was mostly finals eating up all my time. So yeah, though those are over now, meaning we have plenty of time to do streams and coding and all this other fun stuff. So today is day 7 of the class. Yes, last time we went into objects and functions. Um, however, um, I have realized that a number of you guys are confused or frustrated with them. Um, as a result, I am currently planning to make this a somewhat simpler stream, shorter stream today. By that, I mean the next topic on the list wasn't necessarily something to learn to code. We're going to be going over working with an existing open source project, learning about it, basically general tips and tricks for that, which there's quite a number of them that you can use that'll make your life so much easier. And this will come in key if you're going to work with Showdown. And I can really start giving you guys projects once I get them all finalized because I'm waiting on some people to send me some stuff. But it'll also help you with other projects if you're interested. But that does mean that there's no new things to really code today. So as a result, I'm going to assign another objects and functions and methods assignment, which is half done. So again, more time after the stream, and then I will submit the assignment. I can tell you it should be pretty fun though. If you are confused about objects, functions, etc., I would be happy to answer your questions at any time, including during today's stream, especially if it's a question that's pretty common. I don't think I've had any that I've gotten multiple times, but if you are confused, please throw questions at me about them if you are confused about anything from the last stream. Hey, Super Mario Fanism, welcome back to the stream. So yeah. Anyways, without further ado, let's go ahead and swap right into this. Hey, Leaf, welcome, welcome. I know you're frustrated with objects and functions, but I'll get to working with you when we both have some time if you want. We can go over that assignment. Actually, before we start with the other stuff, I think what I want to do here is I want to go over the solution to yesterday's, or not yesterday, stream 6's assignment, to try to help you guys understand stuff. So I uploaded it to the GitHub where that was made for day 4's solution. But yeah, let me make sure this is all showing or mostly showing. That's good enough. All right. So yeah, the assignment was called the Pokemart. This assignment has you working with objects and functions slash methods. And remember that methods are functions created inside of an object. So like a function, it's basically this object's property points to a function. That's a method. So this assignment has you working with those. The goal is to create code to represent a Pokemart that sells items and then simulate a player purchasing some items from the Pokemart. So requirements, read carefully. The Pokemart must be an object containing at least 10 items. You can pick what items are sold and at what price. The player must have a predetermined amount of money and must buy at least 20 items, at least 3 of which must be unique. Duplicates are allowed. Make sure to give the player enough money, to buy enough stuff. Now, one confusion, thing that people seem to have been a bit confused, at least some of you guys, was you thought you had to have the code validate to force them to make these purchases at these numbers. No, that's just more or less what I want you to do when you simulate the player. I want you to make the player buy at least 20 total items and 3 unique to show me your code is working. Basically, that's just my test case rules for that. Log how much money the player has to the console when the script starts. So when you get to the start of doing the actual simulation, log how much money the player has before starting to mess around with the shop. Use an object to keep track of what is currently in the player's cart, and use functions methods to add items to the cart. So You could use either a function or method there. Like my setup uses a method, though it's perfectly acceptable and honestly might be better to just use a function there. Do not allow a player to have a negative number of items in their cart. In other words, you can't have -5 Pokeballs in the cart. That should make some sense, honestly. Log when an item is added to the cart to the console, including the quantity. So say something like added 5 Pokeballs to the cart or whatever. That would work. The Pokemart must have a checkout method, meaning the Pokemart object has to have a method called checkout or something similar to it. You could call it a different name than checkout if you wanted. I don't mind as long as it's the same idea. To calculate how much money the player pays for the items. The checkout method must log a line for each item being purchased, including the name of the item, the quantity, and the cost for that. So, like it would say, let's say Pokeballs cost $1. It would say like 5 Pokeballs for $5. Something like that. That would log all that information that's necessary. A line for the total cost of the cart. So like let's say your total is $25 or whatever. A line saying either how much money the player has left or a line stating the player cannot afford to purchase. So like you have $50 left or you could not afford the purchase, whatever, something. And of course, do that appropriately. Don't just say you can't afford it for everything. If you can actually afford it, you should be able to buy it. Checkout method must not allow for a purchase that the player cannot afford. Obviously, that's interpreted up here, but I decided to mention it down here too. And then 3 optional bonuses I decided to throw at you guys to see if you really do get it. So the first of them was add an extra item that cannot be purchased but can be obtained in a similar way to Premier Balls in the Pokemon games. So in the Pokemon games, you got Premier Balls whenever you purchase 10 or more Pokeballs. For every multiple of 10 you purchased, you would get 1 Premier Ball. So if you bought 100 Pokeballs, you would get 10 Premier Balls. If you bought 20 Pokeballs, you would get 2 Premier Balls. If you bought 33, you would get 3. It rounds down. If you do this, make sure the item cannot be added to the cart because you shouldn't be able to purchase a Premier Ball. You should only be able to obtain it in this manner. And let me make sure, never mind that link. And note how many were given if it's greater than 0, obviously. If you're not getting any of these Premier Balls, there's no reason to log after successfully checking out. So only if they actually were able to make the purchase. So if they tried to buy 3,000 Pokeballs and don't have the money for that, don't give them the Premier Balls because they didn't actually buy. Let me check. Okay. Bonus 2. Make it so that the player can remove items from their cart. This can be a new function or method, or you can build it into the one for adding items to the cart. Maybe a negative value indicates a removal. I did that latter. I actually programmed mine to, if you use a negative value to add to the add to cart function method, I mean, because I did a method, it would count as removal and treat it as appropriate. You could easily split that into a separate one, and it might be better to do that. So everyone has a different way of doing that, and it's perfectly fine. Bonus 3, empty the player's cart after they check out in the checkout function and have them make a second purchase. Second purchase only needs a total of 1 item and 1 unique item, unlike the first. So we already went through the test the first time. I'm just making sure that the second purchase actually only purchases whatever you put in the cart. So I threw some hints in. Alright. Dry. Don't repeat yourself. I put this in to remind you guys I don't want giant if chains or anything like that unless it's necessary. Use loops where appropriate, whatnot. Always good to keep that in mind. Try to make your code industrial strength. This means verify function arguments before doing what was asked. So, for example, if you were asked to add 5 Pokeballs to the cart, is a Pokeball an item in the Pokemart? Can you purchase this item? Is the number that you provided valid, or did you stick like tree in for the value, the word tree, because that's kind of not a number? And other things like that, because people don't always pass the right input. Because if you're treating it as if it was player input, even though in this case we're not actually taking input from users, we're just putting input into the file itself. If you're treating it like it was user input, you'd have to deal with that. All right, so yeah, where was I? Right. For example, when adding cart, make sure the requested item is a valid item, which I explained, and can be purchased. Also, make sure the player will not have a negative number of that item in their cart after, or just block negative values. The latter there is mostly for if, add is for add item and you're not working on the bonus slash you're putting the bonus in a different function. However you want to do it. You can use the return keyword to terminate a function early. So like with the industrial strength, if you wanted to stop a function because, I don't know, the arguments were bad or something, use return. Return console.log whatever the error message is, and it will return and log that error message to the console at the same time. Or you could put the console.log first and then just outright return with no arguments. That works as well. Even if the return value is unimportant to the function, like all of mine here, none of these functions return values or methods are important in my script at least. Maybe yours are. That's also acceptable. And the last tip is a small new piece of code, a method of a global object that we'll get into next stream called math. It's math.floor. Use math.floor number to round number down to the nearest whole number. Returns an integer. So like if you put in 3.14, you would get 3. If you put in 3.99999, you would get 3. It's pretty simple, and that is specifically there to help you with the Premier Ball example. Let me reply to this DM because it's related to the stream real quick. All right. So that's the assignment. So here's what I did. So obviously the usual use strict that I usually include in my things to help you out anyways. So I created my Pokemart. So const Pokemart because I'm not going to modify it, but you could also use let. I'm not too picky about that. And I have an entry for each item. So each entry property is the name of the item you can buy. So like potion, super potion, hyper potion, in all lowercase form intentionally. I did not use camel case here because I decided I wanted to treat it like IDs. Generally with something that I'm going to manipulate like this, which you'll see in a little bit, Showdown has a toID function, and it's a function that I often put in other scripts I write. I didn't put it here because that'd be a bit overkill. It's a bit complicated to explain right this second. But it turns something like super potion into this ID version here. So that's why I write it in that manner in this case. And sometimes there are exceptions like that to the usual camel case or whatever you're doing. But yeah, I did it that way. And then inside of those are also objects that contain information. So potion, Pokemart.potion is an object that contains properties for name, which is a display name, ID, which is the same as whatever which is quite literally going to be the same as the property you use to access the object, which can sometimes be useful. I don't know if I used it here or all, or if it would be necessary. I just did it out of habit. So, and then the cost. So the most important ones really are name and cost. Obviously, cost is how much, and I did the in-game prices. I'm using the in-game money, but you could use US dollars or whatever your local currency is. It doesn't matter too much as long as it makes sense. So yeah, I did 11 items. 10 of them you could purchase, and Premier Balls, which I set the cost to false and set it to cannot be bought. So, and then I have my checkout method, which we'll get to in a little bit. Alright, so cart, I added a comment to my solution. You could put money and add item outside the cart, or even split add item into add item and remove item, but this is how I did it when I set up the assignment. Again, this doesn't have to be a method or anything. It's just the way I chose to do it here. Alright, so cart is another object. Like I said, we need a cart to track information. I chose to stick other information inside the cart as well. You could just make this an empty object and fit things in there. So I decided to store money and the function or method in this case, used to add items or remove items from the cart in here. So money is going to be how much money the player has, and it's initially set to 30,000. And of course that's Poke because we're doing Pokemon costs. And add item is a method that handles that, adding and removing items from the cart. So we're going to start with that because we're going to go into, you have to add items to a cart before you check out. So add item takes two arguments, item and amount. Item is going to be a string that represents an item from the Pokemart that you want to add to your cart. So like down here we're calling it with Pokeball. And amount is going to be how many of that item you want to add to your cart, and it defaults to 1. Again, down here we added 45 to our cart. So first thing we do is we floor amount in case somebody put in something that's not an integer, because you can't add a Pokeball and a half to your cart or something. It doesn't work like that. You buy one or more, not 1.5. Hey, yes, we are actually. I'm doing some review on this because I have a lot of questions and confusion on objects and functions, so I'm hoping this will help. And I am currently working on another assignment that should also be pretty fun for objects and functions, since this stream won't go over any new coding concepts in general. Nothing that can easily be assigned. So, yeah. The next line is another validation line. This is an if statement that checks to see if one of these three statements evaluate to true, because there's a couple ors here, logical ors. So first one is if not item. So when we learned statements, if statements, we learned everything boils down to true or false. It's truthy or falsy. So we're basically checking if item after it's boiled down to true or false, and then inverting its results. So if item evaluates to true, and then we not true becomes false, that doesn't run. However, if item is a falsy value like an empty string or undefined or whatever, then it won't run. Hold on, I'm getting pinged by an admin on Showdown. Let me double check what's going on here. Yeah, I gotta answer this question really quickly. I don't think I have. Someone's asking, is it possible for both players to leave Showdown in a louder game while having the timer left off? I think so, not 100% sure. I'll leave it at that for now because I do need to focus on this stream for you guys. Alright, so continuing on then. So item, basically that checks if item is a falsy value. An empty string, nan, mostly undefined. In other words, you didn't even give us an item. The idea is there if you didn't even pass an item to add to, if you didn't even try to add an item to your cart, that's not going to work. So that's what we're trying to catch there. But yeah, it can also catch some falsy things. But still, it can't catch invalid things if you put an invalid thing in, unless that happens to also be falsy, which is very unlikely, honestly. So that's where our next check comes in. So now we know that item exists. And now we need to check if it's valid. So we're doing not Pokemart item. Now, if you'll remember from objects, this is another way to access the value of an object's bracket notation. And you can, inside of those brackets, you can put a string, or in this case, we're going to go ahead and put in a variable, which should contain a string, but it also might not, but that's fine. If it doesn't, it's not going to work. It's not going to crash either, or at least I don't think it will. Depends on what you stick in, but yeah, unless someone does something ridiculous, it should be fine. But yeah, so what we're doing here is we're basically checking if Pokemart item exists. So let's say item is Pokeball. It'll check to see if Pokemart has a property named Pokeball. So if we go up here, we say there is actually one, and it's not at the top, it's right here. Objects are a truthy value. They evaluate to true. They're not a falsy value. So the not will invert that true to false, meaning we have a false. And we want, if it's valid, we want it to evaluate to false, because we only want this statement to evaluate to true if the argument passed is bad, wrong. So, so that's the idea there. So basically, if the item does not exist in the Pokemon shop, we're done. Now this last one is very similar to the second one, except it checks .cost. It checks the cost parameter. Now this, in theory, this could be a crash, you might think, but actually it's not. So first I'll explain why this potentially could crash, and then I'll explain why it won't in this situation. So if you try to check if Pokemon item is undefined, and you try to do like undefined.cost, you're going to get a, I don't remember what type, syntax or something, or reference, I don't remember what error exactly, but you're going to get an error. It's going to crash. However, this won't happen because of our previous statements. If you have a chain of ORs like this, if the statement is guaranteed to not, if the statement is either guaranteed to be able to return true or not be able to guarantee to return true, in other words, the statement's solution's already been calculated, it will skip. So like, if item is a falsy value, it doesn't calculate either of these two, just goes straight to this. Same thing here. So if Pokemon item doesn't exist, it skips this check and goes straight to here. Meaning if it gets to this check, the item exists in the Pokemon. So it's, what we're trying to check here is a couple things. First, we're trying to check if someone's trying to buy Premier Balls. Those have cost set to false. And not false is true, meaning it runs the if statement and you can't purchase that. It's also there to handle the checkout method, because the checkout method does not have a property called cost. It just doesn't work like that with methods, meaning it will also return false, or, well, true. Or, well, yeah, false, not false becomes true, exit. However, if it's something normal like a luxury ball, which does have a cost, that'll be true, which will become false, and that's the end of the if. This will not run. If it does run, it'll log to the console the item doesn't exist or can't be bought and could not be added to the cart. Now, when we use return like this, we're returning whatever the value of that method console.log returns. And console.log returns undefined, also known as void, when you look at like TypeScript or whatever. So it's going to return nothing, and honestly, this method does not care about its return values, so we're not interested in the return value of this method. Let me double check. Okay. Alright, and feel free to drop questions as we're going. I will keep an eye on chat. So that's that first check. So the next check is for amount. So first thing we do is we check if amount is exactly equivalent to 0. So if it's a number and it's equivalent to 0. If it is, we log that amount needs to be a non-zero value. Now, like I said, this method handles adding and removing. Removing is indicated by negative numbers. Adding is indicated by positive values. That's the design of it. So 0 is the only invalid number here. So next we do something that's not so much validation, but something else. So, and honestly, I probably could add a check here to make sure amount is a number, but I forgot to do that. So yeah, even I make mistakes sometimes. But this first check here, this item equal undefined. So remember that this refers to the object that a method belongs to. So this refers to cart because add item is a method of cart. So that's cart item basically. So if that's undefined, in other words, we don't have that property, which by default is going to be true. Item is a valid item from the Pokemon, a string containing the name of a valid item from the Pokemon right now. We know that from our checks above. And we want to add that info to the cart. However, the cart doesn't start with all these slots. We just add slots as necessary here. So we start by initializing that slot and setting its value to 0. That's what that if statement does. The reason for that is so that we don't get nan in the next function unless there's an issue with amount. So the checks this item, which is going to be 0 if there was nothing, or whatever it was if you're adding more, plus amount. If that's less than 0, which means your total amount in the cart after you do that calculation would be a negative value, which isn't allowed because you can't have a negative value in the cart. We return an error. Adding amount items to the cart would cause the number of this item in the cart to drop under 0, which isn't allowed. This will only happen if amount's a negative value. So then we do this item plus equal amount, which sets this item to its current value plus the amount value of the amount variable. So like if you had 0 and like with this first call, it would set the value of Pokeball to 0 plus 45 or 45. And then lastly, we do a check here. If amount is greater than 0, in other words, we add it to the cart, we log added amount item and an S if appropriate, because that checks if it's plural or not. If it's 1, we don't need an S to the cart. Otherwise, we say removed amount times -1 items from the cart. Amount's going to be negative otherwise, so we need to multiply it by -1 to make it say positive, because we don't want to say removed -5. We want to say removed 5. So simple enough. That's add item in the example. Keep forgetting what could be done exactly, Super Mario fanism. And then I'll show some of this start stuff too. So we'll go over this until we hit checkout, and then we'll jump into checkout once we hit there. So start console.log player has cart.money polka dollar or dollars left. I added the S check just because code, industrial strength code. Even though it shouldn't be necessary, it should be 30,000 unless someone changes it to 1. And if it's 1, that's kind of dumb because you can't buy anything for 1. So yeah, we do 4 add item calls here. So cart.add item, Pokeball 45, add 45 Pokeballs to the cart. Then we add 5 dive balls, 7 hyper potions, and then we add -10 Pokeballs. In other words, we remove 10 Pokeballs from the cart. So that each time we call that, it runs through this block of code, performing these tests, and will return the appropriate message at some point. Then we do Pokemart.checkout cart, and that's where we'll head up to here for. So checkout is a method on Pokemart. It takes one argument, cart, which expects the cart object we define down here. Now I could just not take an argument and use cart itself, but I wanted to make it clearer, so at least for you guys, so I put cart as an argument and you just pass it straight in. So yeah, since cart's global, however, depending on your environment, you might not be able to access it. Scope is always fun to deal with. Alright, so cart, the checkout. Obviously, I've described what checkout's supposed to do above in the comments of this assignment instruction. So this is what it does. So first we declare 2 variables, total cost and premier, and set them to 0. Total cost is going to track how much the entire cart costs in Poke. And premier is going to track how many premier balls we should give the player when the checkout is completed, if any. Both of these default to 0 because that should make sense, right? So then we log checking out items in cart. So we signify that we're starting to check out in the console log. Next, we run a loop. We loop through the cart using a for in loop. So let item in cart. We're doing this so we can work with each individual item in the cart. We have a number of things to do with them. First, we do another validation check. If not this item is a property from cart, and this refers to Pokemart because checkout is a method of Pokemart again. Why are we doing this check, you may ask? Well, cart has a couple of things that aren't items that you're purchasing, money and add item. So we need to do this check to make sure we don't try to do some calculations that will make no sense on things that shouldn't be, because they're not items you're purchasing. So that check's there for a reason. And we also have an or cart item is less than or equal to 0. Why this? Well, obviously less than shouldn't be allowed, and equal to 0 we don't need to do anything with. We don't need to log a message about trying to purchase 0 of an item. And we don't need to modify the cost if you're purchasing 0 luxury balls. You're not going to get a luxury ball. We don't need to make any changes to total cost or anything, as an example. So if that happens, we use the continue keyword to skip the entire rest of the loop and move to the next item in the cart object. So next we create a variable called cost that only exists inside this loop. And we set it equal to Pokemart item.cost. Item does exist on Pokemart because of the previous statement. And we multiply that value times cart item. So this item cost is going to be the cost of the item we want to purchase, and cart item is going to be the quantity we want to purchase, which is obviously going to give the cost of purchasing that many of an item. Then we log this message to console. So cart item, so like the number 5 as an example. This item.name, so Pokeball, and then we add our S if appropriate, so like 5 Pokeballs, 4, and then cost. So 5 Pokeballs for 500 or whatever, as an example, is how that would be built out. Then we take total cost and add the value of total cost and cost together and set that to total cost, a plus equal. And then last check in here is if the item we're looking at is a Pokeball. This is the only place I used ID, though in theory I could have just checked if name is how we spelled Pokeball. It doesn't matter too much for the IDs, like I said. And we set premiere to math.floor cart item divided by 10. So I'll break that down. Cart item is the quantity. If we divide that by 10, we're either going to get an integer if it's divisible by 10, or we're going to get a decimal, something like 3.5 or whatever. It basically moves the decimal point one place to the left. So if you have 35, that becomes 3.5. However, you cannot have half a premier ball or an eighth of a premier ball or whatever. A tenth, I mean. So we need to round that down to the nearest whole integer, and that's where the math.floor we explained comes in. So the math.floor method will turn 8.999 or whatever into 8. So premiere will be set to that. So if we had less than 10, it should set it to 0, which is the same value as before. Otherwise, it should be a value greater than 0, which will come in handy later. So after this loop completes, we've looped through, calculated the total cost for everything. Yeah, that is something you could do. You could also do Pokemart item equals equal undefined. But yeah, you can totally do things like that. Like my thing is specifically set up for this. Like I designed it in that manner. So I designed it so that the carts, all the IDs and the properties in the cart would match the IDs in the Pokemart, specifically so I could do things like that. Because it's useful. It's easy to say, okay, I need to check if this item I'm trying to buy exists in the Pokemart. How do I do that? I just check if it exists as a property in the Pokemart. And then I use that same property in the cart for when doing checkout validation and such. Alright, so yeah, there's all sorts of cool, unique tips and tricks you could do like that. There's millions of ways to do things with code, honestly. You just gotta keep working at it, and eventually you'll learn a lot of this stuff. I don't blame you for not knowing this stuff at first. It's just a lot to take in. Alright, so next up, we do a check. If not total cost, in other words, if total cost is 0, because it's going to be a number, and the only number that's going to be falsy is 0. And it should not go down because our check up here makes sure that cart item is not negative, meaning we're always going to have 0 or a positive number. So basically, if you didn't buy anything, your cost is 0 to check out. The cart is logged, the cart is empty, the player left with nothing, and return. We're done with this. We don't need to make a purchase because we didn't try to purchase anything. So that's how we handle that. Next up, we log player's total is total cost. So because the cost is not 0 and you have a cart with at least one item in it, we log how much it's going to cost. Then we check if you can afford it. If cart.money is greater than or equal to total cost, so in other words, you have more or just enough money, we take that amount from cart.money with minus equal, and then we log Player has cart.money, Pokedollar, or then an S if appropriate, left. So player has 145 Pokedollars left or whatever. And since this purchase was successful, we need to do our Premier Ball check. So if Premier is greater than 0, if it's 0, you didn't get any Premier Balls, we don't need to do this. Otherwise, we need to log it. So player got Premier, like 3 is an example, a number. This.premierball.name. So Premier, I'm using a dot check because I know exactly what I need to grab here. So this is Pokemart, Premier Ball is the property, and name is what I want to access, and then the usual S added check as a free bonus. So player got 3 Premier Balls as a free bonus. And that's the end of that. If you do not have enough money else, player only has cart.money Pokedollar and an S if appropriate dollars left and cannot afford the purchase. Player left with nothing. So notice neither of these return because we want it to continue to the next block regardless. We want to empty out your cart regardless if you could afford it or not because you tried to check out. That's the way I decided to set it up. In theory, you could set it up so that if you can't afford it, it leaves your cart with whatever you had in it so you can make adjustments. Either works. I decided to do this way. If I wanted to do it the other way, I'd add a return statement after this line. Regardless, emptying the cart out. So the idea is we want to get rid of all the items from the cart, the properties from the cart that shouldn't be in there. You could set them to 0 or delete them. I deleted them. So first we need to loop through the cart again. And then we're still inside Pokemart, so this refers to Pokemart. If this item, in other words, the thing we're looking at in the Pokemart, and it's not, there's a not there, so invert it. So if it exists, if it does not exist on the Pokemart, continue. In other words, don't delete it if it's not something you can buy from the Pokemart because then it's money or the add item method, and we're going to break the whole script if we delete those. So don't delete those. Otherwise, delete cart item. Gets rid of that property completely. You could also set it to 0 in theory as long as your script handles the 0 appropriately. Then end of method. You don't need to return unless you need to return a value. If you want to return void, undefined, whatever you want to call it, you can just end the method. So that's the whole idea here. So down here, checkout, it'll do the appropriate thing. Then we did another purchase here. Our cart's empty after we checked out. We added 2 max potions and 3 ultra balls and checked out again. So this whole thing run. Let me cd solutions. And I'm going to do node Pokemart solution.js. So player has 30,000 Pokedollars. Added 45 Pokeballs to the cart, added 5 Dive Balls to the cart, added 7 Hyper Potions to the cart, removed 10 Pokeballs from the cart. Checking out items in cart, 35 Pokeballs for 7,000, 5 Dive Balls for 5,000, 7 Hyper Potions for 10,500. Player's total is 22,500. Player has 7,500 Pokedollars left. Player got 3 Premier Balls as a free bonus because 35 is not greater than 40, so you only get 3. Then again, added 2 max potions to cart, added 3 ultra balls to the cart, checking out items in cart, 2 max potions for 5,000, 3 ultra balls for 24,000 or 2,400. Player's total is 7,400. Player has 100 Pokedollars left, and then it's over at that point. So that is the assignment completed. That's my solution to the assignment I gave you guys. Does anyone have questions about that? Thank God we spent 45 minutes on explaining that, but I know you guys are struggling, so hopefully that'll help with that. I will go ahead and shift back to this. I'll give you guys a little bit to do that while I double check everything for our feature presentation here. Alright, let me make sure there's no questions anywhere else. Alright, cool. So we're going to go ahead and move from that then. Alright, so if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in chat. I'll take them anytime. So we're going to move to our main meat here, which is going to be about basically learning about an existing project, open source specifically. So you could also use this with closed source, I suppose. But yeah, so we're gonna learn about a new existing project, and we're gonna use Showdown as an example. So the goal with this is to teach you guys how to self-educate yourself on a new open source project. So let's say like one time for me is today on objects and functions. No, actually, I wanted to do a review on that. The assignment, however, will be so you guys get more practice with them because they are very important and can be complicated. So double assignment for that. Mostly because we're not doing much code, yeah. But yeah, okay. Yeah, the lag between chat and stream is always a bit annoying for me. But yeah, and I'm sure it's a bit annoying for you guys too, but I can't do much about it. Alright, so the goal is to teach you guys how to self-educate yourself on a new open source project. So, like, let's say one time, just like what's happened to me, I don't know, find a game or something you played online or something that was fun. You notice bugs or whatever, and you think it's cool, you want to contribute or whatever, and it's open source, so you're able to go to GitHub and go to their page, and you can see all the code, and people can contribute it to it. So, the question now becomes, um, yeah, I can understand the latency. That's going to happen. It's got to go from my laptop to the Twitch, and Twitch has got to do whatever it needs to do with it, and there's about 10 seconds delay. Um, how do you contribute to that? Now, not so much the technical info, like how do you make a pull request, but more, okay, so there's this code base I have, and I have no idea where anything is or how anything works, really. I have an idea of what JavaScript is, and I can see this guy declared a function here, and I know what the heck a function is, but what does this function do? How does it interact with the rest of the code? And all these other questions like that. Because that's a question you're going to come at a lot when you're working on open source. So that's what this stream today, along with helping with objects and functions, is attempting to do. So so we're going to go over searching a code base using Git Grep and GitHub. A bit of code archaeology, as me and Pre put it when we talked about this section. In other words, looking at Git blame to see the history of what something's changed. Um, go over some tips like learn as much as you need to, not everything. Um, code tracing. I did not research the VS Code debugger, dang it. So I'll have to show you guys how I do that manually. And communicating with project developers, aka human interactions. Oh boy. uh, but yeah, so that's what we'll go over. So searching a code base. So this is Showdown, as you guys know. I will post a link for chat for anyone who does not have this link. If I could, thank you. So this is Showdown. So obviously, if this is your first time looking at it, just like I said with the other example, that random site you found or whatever, it's pretty daunting. You have no idea what any of this is really. Like, you have a general idea. Like, if you worked with Node.js, you're like, okay, I know what a package.json is. At least if you worked with some things, like, I know my students probably don't, but if you have, you probably do. But, like, what's server? What's it contain? What's its purpose and such? Things like that. So, a lot of this is stuff you're going to have to figure out and ask questions about. So, there's no magic key to finding out how it all works. One good thing might be to do is read documentation, like README. Like, this will teach you about it. What is this? This is the source code for the game server, Pokemon Showdown, a website for Pokemon battling, etc., so forth. And it'll tell you all about it, installing, setting up, and all sorts of things, information, credits, you name it. There's also other information files like contributing.md. You'll want to read these if you're contributing to an open source repo. Never mind the code owners file. Other ones, like there's a protocol file somewhere. Like protocol is another documentation file. But sometimes, and well, at least in PS's case, is an example of this. code is not well documented, at least not within its own file. Sometimes code will be documented within the file, like for example, I believe sim, don't think it's in here, but a number of sim functions will have, like here, run event. Run event is the core Pokemon Showdown's event system, and it'll go all into a huge amount of detail of how this giant thing works. And this is a TypeScript file, by the way, so it looks a little different, but it's still a method and works like that. But yeah, documentation might be included in the file on the methods you're looking for and such. So so one way to get the basic idea of the repo is to poke around with it a bit. But let's say you're looking for something somewhat specific. So let's say, I don't know, you found, I'm trying to think of a good example here. Let's say that you found, like, let's use Showdown as an example. Let's say you found that when you you want to figure out, I gotta think for a sec. I know where I want to look, but I gotta remember the file structure because it's been too long since I poked with this. Let's say you found a typo in something. I suppose we could start with a typo, easy enough. Let's say you found a typo in help tickets or something. You might be able to find where help tickets is, but let's assume you have no idea. So you have no idea where any of this is. How would you find that? Well, it's mostly, some of you have already figured this out, those of you who submitted changes to the server based on the three things we have, but others have not. What we're going to do is I'm going to show you guys a way to search for it. Now, there's two ways. Most of you guys used a GitHub search to find it, which is not a bad thing necessarily, though Pre has shown that there is a better way. It's called Git Grep. We're going to use that here. So Git Grep. Yeah, let me just pop up the help for it, unless that's going to open somewhere else. Yeah, of course it's going to open in a browser. Okay, we'll switch to that. But yeah, Git Grep is a command from Git. It will let you search, basically. So all sorts of options, but the basic idea is look for specified patterns in all the tracked files. In other words, files that are tracked by Git, any of the files on the open source repo. So that's the basic idea there. So what I'm going to do here is, let's say, let me pull up the file and actually look in here for a sec so I actually grep something that exists. Because otherwise we're not going to get any results, and that's just going to be annoying. I don't know, let's say you know exactly what it is. So let's say we accidentally added an S. I'll make a small change here. So let's say when you're trying to report an inappropriate username, it says report an inappropriate username or status message, and that S doesn't make sense there. So you're like, I want to fix this. So how would I find that? Well, git grep, and then if I could paste, please, git grep the words you want to find. So if I would do this right, thank you very much. God, I have not worked with this enough. Double check where I'm doing this right. Right, I didn't save the files, the problem. Okay, like I said. Okay, let me just get rid of the S just to show it. Okay, come on. What the heck? Oh, I'm not even in the right repo's the problem. Never mind me. Okay. Okay, yeah, I gotta commit it to make the thing appear. So we're just gonna search for it without an S and just assume it is, okay? So you might get a number of So for example here, we got a number of search results here. Never mind me being dumb about the repo thing. So the format here is the file, so like server chat commands.js, and then it'll contain the line that it's on, the information about that. So like this one here is target user.popup. Username has cleared your status message for being inappropriate, and then adds the reason if there is one. And yeah. So that's one example. So like if you were looking for that misspelled text, most likely that would be the only entry. Then you'd know the file and you can use Control F, Control Find in your file and be taken right to it. So that'll search the whole repo for you and take it straight to it. You could also use a GitHub search for this, yes. Um, if you were trying to find something more specific, so like let me get rid of this little change here. So, and actually the line we were looking for is, what's it? Yeah, whatever. But let's say we're trying to find something specific. So like let's say you know for a fact that the method named checkTicketBand is faulty. Well, you could do, and you need to find where that's defined, checkTicketBand, and you'll get various calls to it. So all these come up in server chat plugins helptickets.js. So like one line is function checkTicketBand user, which is a function declaration line. Then two other appear to be let band message equal calling that function. So we'd want to go to the first one. We'd want to, and this is all the same file. So we could just go to this file, Control F checkTicketBand, and go to where we need to go from there. So is that making sense so far with Git Grep? Is there something wrong with searching on VS? Is there a search function on VS that I know? I don't know if there's a way you can search through an entire repository on VS. I see a search. Well, I suppose there is a search there. You could do that too. Pre-recommended Git Grep to me. If VS Code search is searching through that, then sure, that works. However, like I have my VS Code. I don't know if you can. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do Alt C. I have my things set up so that I have multiple folders here. So like if I search with search here, it'll most likely cause me to search through all my folders instead of just the ones I want. If you only have that folder in there, it would probably be fine. We can actually probably set the options. So yeah, that works too, I suppose. It might even be using Git Grep as far as I know. But yeah, whatever works for you, as long as you know like how to search for that information. That's the key takeaway here. I'm just giving you guys various tools to work with it. You could use GitHub search, you could use Git Grep, you could use the VS Code search function if you're using VS Code. But yeah, Git Grep and GitHub search are the two that I know you guys should have access to, assuming, I mean, like even if it's not on GitHub, Git Grep is something you will always have though, so be sure to remember that one at least. And thanks for coming in, Leaf. Be sure to catch up when you get a chance. Um, all right, so let's see here. That's one thing, and what was the next thing we need to go over? Alright, so you can also use like search functions or Git Grep to search through various functions, code tracing basically. I'm going to do code tracing now, so let me show you guys an example. So while you're working, you might need to find more information about something. So like let's take this example, check commands.js. Let me find one of these. Let's find where this is defined. I know there's a... Come on, that's not what I want. Yeah, there we go. Okay, this is what I want. So let's say you were trying to, there was some sort of issue or you just wanted to know how this works. Like this is, at one point I actually did this. So I was curious as to how battles were started. So like, I looked at the client and saw that when I sent a search, hit the big search button, it sent battle format or whatever, or something along those lines. So I went and found where this was defined in here. So then I'm like, okay, what does this all do? So actually, let me start with search here because that's easier. Oh my gosh. Well, search is not going to be nice to find, is it? You're annoying. There it is. Okay, so like challenging is search command. So search. The idea of this is you search for whatever battle. So like it does a bunch of stuff, and it gets to this point, and you're searching for a battle. So like this does a bunch of things. Um, so let's say, okay, I want to see more about how it handles searching for a battle. Right now, all I know is it makes sure that you passed a format, and you can actually search for a battle, even if there's a ladder mod chat set, which is an option, but it's only used on private servers. Um, so how the heck does this work? So like ladders target dot search battle. Okay, where is that defined? I honestly don't know right now myself. So let's do a grep for that. Let's find that. So Git Grep, and it's going to be search battle. Ladders appears to be I'll explain that another time. But yeah, search battle. Let's see what comes up for that. Okay, I see two. Server chat commands.js, which is where we are now, and server ladders.js, a sync search battle user connection, which appears to be what we want, the definition of the function. So let's head to server ladders.js. Or it's gonna be TS actually. Okay, so Control F.